Welcome to the Afikra podcast. My name is Mikey Mhenna. Today on the series, we have Brahim El Guabli, who is the chair and associate professor of Arabic studies at Williams College. He's also the author of the book Moroccan Other Archives, History and Citizenship After State Violence. Brahim, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mikey. Thank you for having me.
You know, I came across your book, and it's the reason why I wanted to chat with you, because every time we post anything about North Africa and about Morocco or other parts of North Africa, there's always a very active comment section.
That's good.
And every single time, even no matter how much we try to quote unquote get it right in terms of the caption, there are people who chime in saying, this is not quite right. That's not how you spell this. That's not how you say this. That's not the right vantage point. There are other stories. There are other histories. There are other versions of the truth that you're not taking into account and platforming. And when I came across your book, I was like, okay, this is precisely what I want to talk about. The history of these other archives and sort of how we got here. So you're exactly the person I want to talk about. Maybe we can start with just having you introduce the book a little bit and the themes that you're trying to parse out.
Thank you so much for having me. And it's great to hear that there are reactions from North Africa to your work. North Africa is definitely a very vibrant part of the larger, Tamazgha Arab world, and whatever happens in the Middle East definitely has its impact on what's happening on the way North Africans receive and deal with information. And just like as a side, people have always engaged with the Mashriq in this way, and it's partly like one way of like feeling kind of like excluded or like not included enough or not heard enough. And I think this is a phenomenon that goes all the way back to the Nahda, through independence and all of that. So I think as much as it's kind of like expresses resentment, it also expresses this really need to strengthen the ties and belong in, while also keeping difference. And I think that's really an important thing to kind of like highlight. So for this book, it started as a dissertation, and I worked on my dissertation on political imprisonment and the departure of Moroccan Jews. And I looked at how Moroccan literature, particularly the one written from the 1990s up until the present, has dealt in very novel and innovative ways with questions of political repression, and particularly political disappearance or topics that have some like touch of political disappearance of them in them. So when I wrote the dissertation, I talked about political prisoners, Marxist-Leninists, and soldiers who were disappeared to Tazmamart. So the thing here is that a lot of scholars have actually written about the years of lead. The years of lead are this period in Moroccan history where state violence was rampant between the independence of Morocco in 1956 until the death of Hassan II in 1999. The state really resorted to violence to quell dissidents or even like civic initiative that didn't agree with the state. However, what I noticed is that when you have a 5-decade period like the years of lead, it was not only impacting political prisoners who were directly involved in the struggle with the state, but it also impacted other sectors of society. It impacted culture, it impacted the economy, it impacted other people, other categories of Moroccans, particularly the Amazigh or the Berber people and Jews. So for me, the idea has been, instead of only focusing on political prisoners, I'm going to broaden this idea of disappearance and enforced disappearance to also look at other categories of Moroccans who did not make it to this imagination of the post-colonial Moroccan nation. As it so happens, some of my colleagues invited me to really, like when I started the PhD program, I really just wanted to study political prisoners. But then I was invited to write a chapter for a book, and I read novels in the summer, and I discovered this body, this corpus of novels about Moroccan Jews that has never been studied. And these are novels written by Muslims in Arabic. And I was reading them that summer, and they wrote a chapter about them, and that sparked an idea in my head that, oh, what I was reading about political imprisonment can actually overlap in a lot of ways with the silencing and absence of Moroccan Jews from history curricula, from the way we talk about the nation. Of course, there is this ceremonial talk about the Judaic aspect of Morocco, like during occasions and all of that. Then also, like when I was revising the dissertation to become a book, I was increasingly interested in the Amazigh question and what it means for Amazigh, and also to fit into this framework of disappearance during the years of Lid. That's where I developed this concept of other archives and state violence and citizenship within the Moroccan context, particularly other archives as spaces where these others who were absented, erased, silenced, were not given their space in the configuration of post-colonial Morocco, return. Like, it's some sort of hauntology, but it's a hauntology that's within a very specific context that defies in a lot of ways the way in which Western theory thinks about archives and writing history, but it's also in conversation with the larger trends that are taking place in the world, of course.
Yeah. Brahim, I'm going to ask you a really simple question.
Yeah.
And you sort of pointed to it. What is the Amazigh question?
That's a wonderful question. And I think it harks back in a way to what you started with. So Amazigh people are the indigenous people of North Africa. They are referred to in sources as al-Barbar or al-Barabir or les Berbères, depending on what you read. For us Amazigh speakers, we think that the word Barbar, Barabir, does violence to us because it really categorizes us with barbarians, uncivilized people. But the history, however, is that the Romans called any people who did not speak Latin, their language, barbarian. So barbarian in this sense meant either an uncivilized person or a person who did not speak Latin. But again, when you hear it used in Arabic, it's really used with this sense of hurting us as people. So you see it like on social media being used and like Arbarabir, and it's a way to do violence. But anyway, when we speak about Amazigh people, we are using a term that's not actually new. It's an old term. Hassan al-Wazzan, in his a description of Africa, speaks about Awal Amazigh, which means Amazigh language, when he talks about Numidians. And it's a revitalized word that means free people, and they are the indigenous people of North Africa. The Amazigh culture movement turned the Amazigh issue into a question, and here I'm answering your question directly, because in the post-independence period, the states that were created in North Africa, which the Amazigh culture movement actually calls Tamazgha. Tamazgha, which is the Amazigh homeland, extends from the Canary Islands on the Atlantic Ocean to South Egypt and encompasses large swaths of land from sub-Saharan Africa. So it's a very large territory that includes many people, different religions, but they are all tied through this idea that at a certain point in time, they spoke a version of Amazigh language. So actually, Amazigh are not tied through ethnicity, they're tied through language. which is fascinating, right? Like other people can claim like a common origin, but Amazigh do not claim any common origin. They claim this shared language that makes them Amazigh. And it doesn't matter whether you're black or white, Christian or Muslim or Jewish, you're brought under the umbrella of the Amazigh. So the question now, after independence, different countries, Tunisia, Morocco, Libya, Algeria, Mauritania, defined themselves as Arab and Muslim countries. When you say Arab, that means that you're erasing the indigenous people of the land, that you're foregrounding one identity over the other. And so the Amazigh question became a question of rehabilitation, recognition, and constitutionalization of Amazigh rights as indigenous people of North Africa without any strive to exclude the Arabs or Arabized people in North Africa, because in its indigenous conceptualization of North Africa, the Amazigh cultural movement that emerged in the 1960s considers everybody who lives in North Africa indigenous. Some of us kept the language. Others became Arabized and they speak a version of Arabic that's spoken in North Africa, but that does not make them Arab. However, the ideology of Arab nationalism makes it very difficult for some people to accept that Amazigh people have a language and have an identity, and the Arabization policy that was put in place in the 1960s kind of like created the conditions for the erasure of Amazigh and turned their identity into an Amazigh question.
Can I ask, I want to come back to Amazigh linguistically as a language, and since you are a professor of literature, I want to come back to that in a second, but let's stick with talking about some of these policies. So let's stay in the 1960s. Where did the impetus for Arabization come from? This idea of foregrounding Arab nationalism or Arab identity on a political level, on a sort of policy level, top-down policy level. Where did that come from?
I think what happened is that the French, when they colonized Algeria, a lot of French officers and who were involved in the colonization of Algeria had some sort of involvement with Egypt during the Napoleonic mission in Egypt. And a lot of them had a lot of traffic with Lebanon, with the greater Syria, if you want, and the Hijaz and this area. So they came with these Orientalist ideas to North Africa. And actually, the Arabization of North Africa was catalyzed, was triggered by French colonialism, because they came with this paradigm that everybody was Muslim, these are Arab societies, and they started implementing policies that entrenched Arabic in Algeria particularly. However, at some moment, they also had a change of heart, or they tried to kind of like reconcile Arabization with the recognition of the Amazigh element. So this was called the Berber policy, la politique berbère, or the Berber myth. At some point in the colonial administration, they were like, well, Arabs, and the Arab here really means Muslim. Arabs are uncivilizable. They are people who destroy civilization. The Berbers, or the Amazigh people, can be civilized. They can be incorporated into the European project by turning them into French citizens in the long term. They can be, they can be incorporated into the French civilization, whereas the Arabs were hopeless, literally. And this in the 1930s was translated in Morocco on what became unjustly, of course, the Berber Dahir, Ad-Dahir al-Barbari, which tried to create this wedge or drive a wedge between Arabs and Amazigh people in Morocco by enforcing customary law in the Amazigh places where there were no what's called mahakim shar'iyya, or religious courts. However, what happened is, in the 1930s was a really crucial moment in the development of Arab consciousness and Islamic consciousness in North Africa. That's where Arab nationalism developed in North Africa, in Algeria and in Morocco. And so the contradistinction that happens there is that the emerging national leaders, Msalli al-Haji in Algeria and Alla al-Fasi in Morocco, they are now seeing themselves as Muslim and Arab. In contradistinction to who? In contradistinction to the European, the French, and in contradistinction to the Amazigh. Because when you're saying, so you're actually developing Arab nationalism in North Africa against French policies, which are now trying to bring Amazigh or Amazigh people under their umbrella. And they created this discourse that literally eliminated Amazigh from the public discussion from the 1930s. While Amazigh were fighting the French, like the south of Morocco, southeast Morocco was not colonized. The last place to be colonized in Morocco in 1934 were Amazigh areas. They were fighting the French, resisting the French until the last moment when these Arabic-speaking cities were subjugated. But as this national consciousness was being constructed in response to colonialism, Amazigh were erased from it. And of course, a lot of these leaders also lived in Cairo in the 1940s through the 1950s. And these are the independence moments. So they imbibed and embraced Arab nationalism. And for them, identity in North Africa meant one thing, meant belonging to this larger Arab Ummah, larger Arab nation, and to the Islamic Ummah. That's why they foreground Arabism and Islamism. And when they took power in the 1950s in Morocco and Tunisia, and then they take power in Algeria in 1962, the constitutions emphasized Arabization. So what does Arabization mean? Arabization simply means that when France ruled over North Africa, they put in place language policies that favored French language. So on the surface, Arabization was only meant to eradicate French as a colonial language. However, when you delve deeper in what it did, it actually targeted the Arabization of Amazigh. So the بالعربي, was we say, like a shama'a, like the pretext is French, but the deeper goal was to eradicate Tamazigh and replace it with Arabic in order to homogenize the nation, because in their minds, Amazigh were these enablers of colonialism during the colonial period, and everything that they did through the school system, through the administration, through the dismantling of the infrastructure, scholarly, academic, and educational infrastructure, and even in the publishing industry and in the media, all the infrastructure that the colonial administration put in place to enable Tamazigh during the colonial period was dismantled in Morocco and in Algeria. And that was very clear. The goal was like Amazigh people have no place in this new society. And so you would see this really crazy phenomenon in which people who spoke no word of Arabic would go to court to talk to a judge who was speaking to them in Arabic. Or somebody who is sick would go to see a doctor and they don't know what to say. And the states didn't care, because for them Arabization was more important than communicating with people, than rehabilitating the language. And over the years, what happened? A very deep attrition happened to the language in Morocco and Algeria and Tunisia. So today, if you think about Tunisia, a few thousand people still speak Tamazigh, but they're in the desert. In Algeria, you went from probably like 50% or 40% at the turn of the century to probably 20%. Morocco is the largest place that has the largest Amazigh speaking population. It went from probably like 65% in 1912 to probably now like 40, 45 or 50%. So the attrition is happening.
Yeah.
Some Moroccan intellectuals actually were making call for the assassination of lahajat, like قتل اللهجات. So it's like this like project to kill all the dialects, and of course the dialects here mean Darija, the local language, the local Arabic, and Tamazigh in Morocco.
Yeah. So I want to. That's exactly where I want to go. Where does Darija end and Tamazigh begin?
So I'm not a linguist, so my language, my knowledge about that would be is very shaky. But my understanding is that Darija is stylistically, grammatically, and structurally Tamazigh, spoken with Arabic words. So
Interesting.
if you think about Tamazigh as being the skeleton, the structure, and then you just use some changed Amazigh words, Arabic words to fit into an Amazigh structure. I think that's how I understand it.
So
And of course, over time, what happens is that there is a mixture of words from Arabic, from French, from Spanish, from Tamazigh that mix
yeah.
together and form this Darija, which is, again, an indigenous language of North Africa formed from the daily contact between Tamazigh and Arabic and other languages that were spoken in North Africa.
Yeah. I know you're not a linguist, but I'll ask anyway. Is Tamazigh in the sort of Semitic family of languages?
No, it's not a Semitic language. It's not.
Okay. Are there languages that other people might know that are closely related?
So I think again, if I am not wrong, it's probably classified with like Tigrinya, like some Ethiopic languages, and probably Coptic in the same family. Yeah, but not a Semitic. So
Super interesting.
Tamazigh is not a Semitic language. That I'm certain of. But
Yeah.
but other than that, I think what I've seen is that it's usually discussed with like some Ethiopic languages. Yeah, it belongs to that family.
So one population that I want to talk about that you focus on in your book, to some extent, is the Jewish population of Morocco, and the cultural production of that community, and as one of the sort of other
Yeah.
archives. I'm curious if you can tell us a little bit about that that type of cultural
Okay,
production.
sure. So just like a little bit historical background, Morocco before I think 1970 had the largest Jewish population in the entire North Africa, Tamazgha, and the Middle East. It was at some point it was 280,000 people, but starting from the 1940s, particularly 1948, with the establishment of the State of Israel in Palestine and the recurrent Arab-Israeli conflicts, Jewish populations started leaving Morocco. Like a first wave happened in the 1940s, then the 1950s, then 1967. But a large portion of Moroccan Jews actually left in 1965.
Can I ask, before you keep
Yeah,
on going, can I ask about this? Because I've heard this
yeah,
before, right? And I've known this
yeah,
to be true. Big population of Jews in Morocco who were indigenous to Morocco,
yeah.
Moroccan Jews. Um, and I've never asked a really simple question: why? Where did these people come from? And why isn't there like a huge trail of enormous numbers of Egyptian Jews and Libyan Jews and Tunisian Jews and
So
Algerian
that's
Jews and Moroccan
yeah,
Jews.
that's a
Yeah,
wonderful question, and I think the explanation is really like you can't find a true explanation. There is one, there is one that we are sure of. The other can be like kind of like you, it's a guessing game. So the part that we know of
sure.
is the Andalusian Jews. We know that the Andalusian Jews who lived in North Africa, in Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, along the coastal cities, came from Al Andalus after it was taken away from Muslims. So these Andalusian Jews came. So they are called the Migorashim, like the Andalusian Jews, but there is the Tushavim. The Tushavim are the local indigenous Jews whom people believe came after the destruction of the temple. So they are immigrants. They came to North Africa and settled. And some people would say, well, it's like it's 2,000 year prison. Some people would say it's 3,000 years. But as Simon Levy says, all of this is like guessing games because there is really no evidence to kind of like say, well, we got it, we understand. It could also be North Africans who converted to Judaism over time. It could be so, and that's an important thing that's really that people have been talking about is this Jewish Amazigh indigeneity. So for the Amazigh movement, Jews are indigenous to North Africa, and that's a really important element to think about. So I think this is clear now. Like we have a very old Jewish population whose history and presence in North Africa dates at least over 2,000 years or 1,500 years that we cannot really date exactly. But there is a Jewish population that came from the 15th century from Spain after the fall of Andalus. That one we can actually talk about with certainty because we know the families, we know who they became, we know the origins, and some of them can trace their lineage to Spain. And I don't know if you've heard of this, but Spain actually passed a law that allowed Jewish families whose ancestors were expelled from Spain to recuperate their Spanish citizenship. They did that with Jews, but they did not do it with Muslims who moved from Al-Andalus were also expelled from Al-Andalus. And that I think it's an ongoing debate actually these days. So now a lot of people, so the Jewish migration happened, and so Moroccan Jews did not all go to Israel. Some of them went to Canada, some went to France, some of them went to Latin America, and this population still kind of like keep in touch with Morocco, and I think of all Jewish communities, really, the ones who are from Morocco are the ones who keep in touch with the country in a very interesting way. I mean, it's incredible to see that even throughout the years, this connection did not diminish, and it's an intergenerational connection. So you asked me about the literature. The literature. So despite this very interesting relationship, growing up in Morocco, you did not really learn about Jews or their presence in the country. I grew up in a village that has a Jewish cemetery right in front of my house, but I never understood who Jews were, why their cemeteries are empty, why did they only come like during October and November and April, so it's Passover and like Yom Kippur, but I had no idea what this thing was. It was just like Jews came and go and left. Udain, we say in Tamazigh Udain, Ushkan Udain, Jews came, Dan Udain, Jews left. And the most fascinating thing for me personally was the story of these two people, one named Abdurrahman and the other one named Meir. These two guys were brothers because Meir was Jewish and Abdurrahman was Muslim, and my father would always say Meir is Abdurrahman's brother, but I never understood what it meant. It just meant that they they had the same breast milk and that their mothers nursed them together as they were and these two guys, you would see them like in the 80s. It was just a child and they would see them together. And anyway, so literature comes in to fill the void of historical archives, because I don't know that there is, for example, an archive in Morocco where you can actually go and do research to see exactly in what conditions Moroccan Jews left, what happened to them, what kind of negotiations happened between the Moroccan state and the Jewish agency and like the American government and the Israeli government. You don't have that kind of archive in Morocco. However, what I'm arguing in the book is that literature becomes a space where another archive is created through the memory of the people who lived that moment. So when I got my first job assignment in the High Atlas Mountains, I went to teach in these remote schools, and they would meet these very old guys. The first thing they would tell me is like, "Oh, do you see that house? It used to belong to a Jewish family. Do you see that cemetery? That's the Jewish cemetery." And I found that there is this really raw memory of that time that people had a very hard time to let go of. And it makes sense that a lot of these younger writers who did not live with Jews, so the Jews had already left when the writers I'm studying were growing up, but they heard the story from their elders. They heard about real stories like the one I told you, Abd al-Rahman and Meir being brothers, and these stories find their way into literary works that then kind of like hold the fort for history or create this other archive where absence has taken place. But other archives do not replace history. They create a space for a history to come, to be written, to be engaged with in the methods of historians, of course.
So I want to talk about the source of the pain.
Yeah.
Right. So these people that you're speaking to, these elders who are remembering that moment, why is it such a painful memory? And this, I'm fully revealing my ignorance on the topic. So I'm trying to understand the source of the pain. So you said in 1965 there was a huge number of Moroccan Jews who left, notably 2 years before 1967. Do you understand, do people understand why that happened in 1965? Is there a painful reason that created this moment?
That's a wonderful question, and I think you actually answered it. It's just, I think the pain is exactly what you said. Like, people don't know why their friends, their neighbors, their business partners, the people they grew up with left. So there is a difference between like having conflict and actually push factors that would kind of like explain to you why your neighbor has left, because there was a pending danger, an impending danger that would kind of like put them in danger, put their safety in danger. None of that existed in Morocco. So
there wasn't state violence.
There was no violence. There was no problems, and a lot of Muslims actually were. That's why they are like this memory has not been processed, because people did not understand why somebody they lived with, stayed with, engaged with, treated in probably like in equal terms, would just wake up one day and leave.
What is the order of number of people that we're talking about?
I think we're talking about
probably
100,000 people or even more, because like, so for these older generations, they don't really understand why somebody would just pack and leave, like sell their property, sell their homes, like just leave. So I think the process of talking about it and discussing it and bringing it up in conversations is a way to process that pain and process the trauma and kind of like make sense of what happened, why it happened. And when the people talk to an educated person, I think they seek some sort of illumination beyond what they were just thinking was the explanation. So for the why 65, 65 was a very important moment in Morocco. It was a year where the socialists, the socialists were strongly opposed to the political regime. It was a year of drought, and Morocco, I mean, according to sources, received a lot of donations from the United States in exchange of letting the Jews leave the country. So, so there is this kind of like deal that facilitated the departure of Moroccan Jews from the country. So there was no violence. It was a totally negotiated departure between the Moroccan state and the other states that were involved in that process. And as Simon Levy says in one of the films, like They Were Promised the Sea, he says it was the state infrastructure that actually was deployed to make that happen. And for me,
Oh, this was happening on a state level, like literally the
yeah,
Moroccan
yeah,
state
because
being financed by international or the Americans or whoever were moving people from Morocco on a state level to the state of Israel.
It was not clear like whether like they were moving, people were moving from like like the village to Israel. But what happened is the Moroccan state put in place all its resources, facilitated that immigration, and then people went to the ports, and then the destination was France. Okay, so they would like on the your passport would say you were going to Marseille, but then you end up in Haifa. So that's how it happened. So it's a very interesting process that the state participated in. So and that's in a certain way. That's also what I think helps this very exceptional relationship between Moroccan Jews and Morocco. That there was no expulsion, there was no denaturalization, like citizenships were not taken from people. And even today, if you prove that your grandparents are Moroccan and that you have the documentation, you get your Moroccan passport. So it's a very, very, very specific case, specific relationship that is different from the rest of like other countries that we know, like Iraq and Egypt and other places.
I'm curious. So you grew up in Morocco. Over the course of your research and your engagement with these sort of other archives and other histories, how did your impression of your own citizenship change?
That's a wonderful question. I mean, I think for me, I think the biggest gain I gained from doing this research is claiming my Amazighité and claiming my Amazigh roots, and just understanding that I had to decolonize my mind and decolonize myself. And the process of decolonization involves not accepting anything that you just read on face value, but rather deconstruct things, ask questions, try to always find that there are other versions or more than what you've been told you are. And for me, like a lot of Amazigh people are very tolerant people. We are very, we're accepting, we're open-minded, we clearly, we're not very nationalistic. A lot of us are not very nationalistic in any way. However, at the same time, I think decolonization teaches you that you can be tolerant, but also claim your rights and claim your place under the sun. And I think for me, my connection to my citizenship has been that I see Morocco as a pluralistic nation with plural histories, with plural stories, and that anybody who thinks that it's only one thing or it's only one homogeneous Arab Muslim nation is doing a huge disservice to this very idea of Morocco. So my connection to to the country or to my citizenship has really shifted in a lot of ways. But I think my biggest gain is gaining myself and thinking of myself more and more as an Amazigh person who is deeply engaged with the Arab world, with with the world, but my anchor and my identity is entrenched, anchored in this Moroccan pluralism that should not negate my Amazighity as a condition for this Moroccanness.
Yeah. Okay. True or false? If I said to you, French is the language of the colonizer in Morocco, would you say true or false?
I would say it's more complicated than that.
Second question. If I said to you, Arabic is the language of the colonizer, Fusha is the language of the colonizer, would you say true or false?
Not true. Not true for me.
Okay, so explain to me. Explain
for me,
this to me. In Morocco,
so for
obviously.
me, Arabic is a language that gives us a very deep extension into an entire world with which we share a lot of values, culture, religion, traditions, and I would not want to see Fusha or Arabic, any version of Arabic, as being antagonistic or an enemy of the Amazigh, because I think the problem is not Arabic. The problem is what's made of Arabic or how Arabic is used as an ideology more than anything else. So Arabic and Tamazigh are not mutually exclusive. They can actually grow together, and they have lived and grown together, and they can mutually enrich each other in ways that will be beneficial to not only the two languages, but to the people speaking them. And they hope that one day Arabs will start learning Tamazigh and start learning Nubian and start learning other like Kurdish and other languages that coexist with Arabic as a dominant language in their areas.
Is that different than the relationship with Tamazigh and French?
Yeah, I mean, the culture setting is different because I think French was brought by a different type of colonization. It's a 20th century phenomenon. Again, like when I said it's complicated, what I mean is that it's like we speak French and we enjoy speaking French. And as Katib Yassin said, French is a spoil of war for us, Ghanimat Harb. And I would definitely say that for me, French is a very important language, but I don't see it as like Arabic, the way I connect to Arabic, because Arabic for me is the language of my religion also. Like I'm Muslim, and I have a different intimate relationship with Arabic than I have with French. But at the same time, we also have a lot of Francophone people in North Africa who see French as their language, and we cannot deprive them of that. Like that's also their language. So I would say that French is equally a North African language now, because North Africans snatched that language, mastered it. If you look at literature, a lot of the most successful writers in French are actually from North Africa. They are from the former colonies, and they are recreating, and bringing all this thought and amazing creativity into French. And it would be, to me, it would be irresponsible to just relinquish that and say, hey, French is a colonial language. It's much more complicated than that. We have, as Abdullah Hamoudi, for example, writes in one of his books, Al-Hadatha wal-Hawiyya, Modernity and Identity, he says that we also have built a very impressive scholarly literary tradition in French that it would be very irresponsible, as I said, to relinquish and give up because we think that this language is colonial. And French was colonial in 1912. In 2024, it's no longer colonial. It's part of the landscape or the linguistic landscape in North Africa. And we have to nourish it as much as we also nourish Tamazigh and Arabic and other languages. And that's where the problem is. It's not in refusing other languages. It's actually in giving them equal footing to be able to grow and prosper and exist, because we also cannot deprive people who see themselves as Francophone or Arabophone or Anglophone of the possibility to live in these languages and to sustain their identities as they see them.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, like, as you say, there has been so much original cultural production in French from authentically oriented points of view from North Africa. And so in many ways maybe the question isn't is it North African to speak French?
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe the question is French North African, actually?
Yeah. Well, I think it has become North African. Yeah,
Clearly.
It has become North African.
Clearly.
Because the ties between North Africa and France are you can think about human relationships, you can think about economy, you can think about culture, you can think about the traffic between France and Morocco and Algeria and Tunisia and Mauritania and Sub-Saharan Africa. These are real things that make French a North African or an African language in many ways. And I think the colonial legacy is there. But I think French has evolved or made evolve in different ways that today we should say that we have domesticated French. and
yeah, it's almost like you don't have a monopoly on it, right?
It's
like you made the mistake of giving it to us.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think we should claim it. It's equally our language. But again, I'm saying like our native languages, our indigenous languages should also get the resources and the means and the support they need to be able to continue to exist and not be overwhelmed by more endowed languages in the area.
Yeah. So Brahim, I want to ask you, you have mentioned many thinkers and writers over the last hour of this podcast. So I'm going to end with a final question, which is, can you please give us a list of authors that you think would be good for people to read if they are interested in having a broader, more complicated, contradictory version of Morocco?
Oh, wonderful! Yeah, I mean there are a lot of people, and I think I would start with Abdullah Hammoudi's work. Abdullah is an anthropologist. He taught at Princeton. I think his book Al-Hadatha wal-Hawiyya is an important one. He has another book called Al-Masafa wa-Tahlil, Distance and Analysis about like anthropology in Arabic. Omar Boum, who is also an anthropologist of Morocco, has written a lot about Moroccan Jews. Memories of Absence is his like main book. Susan Slaimovich, who is also at UCLA, has written this foundational book called The Performance of Human Rights in Morocco, published in 2005. I think if people want to read about Islam and feminism, Zakiya Salim, who is at Rutgers, is an impressive scholar who should be read. If people want to read like Morocco during the years of lead and read like a new and recent history of Morocco, probably Mohamed Qabli's book in French. It's not translated into English. It's called Histoire du Maroc. Tarikh al-Maghrib, and it's an edited volume, very bulky, but it kind of like the project is an effort to kind of like reperiodize the history of Morocco and think beyond the Islamic period, because historians have always suffered from this juncture in the study of Moroccan history. Like it begins with the Islamic arrival, the arrival of Islam, but the pre-Islamic period and the ancient periods are not included. This book kind of like expands that. The Amazigh culture movement, of course, I would advise people to read the work of Ibrahim Akhiyat. Al-Nahda al-Amazighiyya, the Amazigh Renaissance, is really an important book. Bisaoud, Mohand Bisaoud from Algeria, Little People for a Grand Cause, is his telling of this story of the Académie Berber when it was founded in France in 1966. And then I think Hussein Wazi, like there are so many people that I can mention who have kind of like really reimagined North Africa as or Tamazgha as a plural space where, by the way, like the motto of the Amazigh culture movement has always been Al-Wahda fi Tanawwa, Al-Wahda fi Tanawwa, unity in diversity. It has never been Al-Wahda fil Iqsa, like unity in exclusion. No, it's been unity in diversity, meaning that we can all be Moroccans, we can all be North Africans, but this North Africanness or this Moroccanness cannot be based on the exclusion of any of the elements that constitute this whole, which I think is actually a very it's like an idea that comes before its time. Like when you think about this idea being developed in 1967, the people who developed it I think, in my point of view, were geniuses, because
who are some of those people?
So Brahim Akhiyat, Ahmed Boukous, Boujma'a Habbaz, like the early generation who formed الجمعية المغربية للبحث والتبادل الثقافي, the Moroccan Association for Research and Cultural Exchange. They formed this association in 1967, and they really laid the ground for the development of the Amazigh culture movement and the development of an indigenous consciousness in North Africa.
Did these people think of themselves as radicals?
No, they didn't. Actually, they thought of themselves as people who were bringing the nation together, and people who did not, who their stake was recognition. The radicals would come later, and the radicals would take the road of nationalism or this very kind of like disturbing conservatism that then, but this, and they criticized these guys who started the movement for not being radical enough. But I think I personally find myself much more sympathetic to this project of unity within diversity than I am to these other polarizations that I don't think are productive.
Was the goal? Sorry, we're going a little of a deep dive on this, but I'm so curious. Was the goal of these people to promote this through cultural production, through published pamphlets and books and things like that, or was it creating a political party?
So when they first started in 1967, and through the end, the ones that I just mentioned, the ones who were like the hardcore, the dynamos of the Amazigh culture movement, till the death of Brahim Akhiyat, for example, the goal has always been to widen the spectrum of the people who had power and to help them see the potential of a diverse and plural Morocco. And they used what I call the Amazigh soft power, behind the scenes demands like pressure, petitions, personal connections, discussions with the ministers, and all of that to create space for Amazigh people, and they succeeded. They succeeded in a lot of ways because they sustained the Amazigh culture movement in the 80s, in the 90s. They created literature, they created newspapers, they created this underground consciousness about Amazigh identity and its issues. They invented literature, and they invented an Amazigh literature, and they invented a critical language to study that literature. They were responding to all the voids that 50 years of attrition has left on Amazigh language. They developed a writing system for Amazigh language in Arabic. They are the ones who reclaimed the Tifinagh alphabet. By the 1990s, what happens, there is a global turn towards human rights, right? And then they captured that moment, and they started bringing the Amazigh issue into the attention of the world, like the UN, the indigenous committees work, and while keeping the traditional channels of connection with the state and negotiation. And 2001 was a major moment in the history of Amazigh people in Morocco, with the establishment of l'Institut Royal de la Culture Amazigh, the Royal Institute for Amazigh Culture, which then starts this process of like including Tamazigh in school, constitutional recognition in 2012. Now, like when you go to Morocco, you see that the public sphere in Morocco is written in Tamazigh and Arabic. It's fascinating. It's like being in Montreal. Like you have this trilingual like signage everywhere, Tifinagh is everywhere. You really feel that you are in a totally different Morocco. That's what they wanted. They achieved that. There was a faction, though, who were more conservative in their political views, more radical in the way they made demands, and they created Al-Hizb al-Demokrati al-Amazighi, the Amazigh Democratic Party, but it was a very short-lived experience. And so these people kind of like were useful in pushing the agendas to the very far, but the really important ones were the ones who stayed in the middle and kept a moderate position, which allowed them to federate even the support of the ones who were conservative in the 1950s and the 1960s, who refused any discussion of Tamazigh. But towards the end, they were able to kind of like shift the discourse and allow this change that we live today to happen.
Yeah. Last question before we go. Why did the years of lead end? Was it simply the death of King Hassan?
It was the death of King Hassan II, but it started actually, the end started before his death. It started in 1994 with the largest amnesty of political prisoners in the history of Morocco. And I think Hassan II at that point knew that he did not have many more years to live, and he was thinking about the political transition from himself to his son. And he made some strategic decisions that spared Morocco any continued political violence. And I think he really tried to reconcile himself with political parties. He had kind of like changed the constitution. And then he appointed what's called in Morocco the alternative governance, the government Hukumat Tanawub, I think it's called in Arabic, and brought in Al-Yusfi, who was like one of the main opposition leaders of his rule, and kind of created this openness. It was an amazing political atmosphere in Morocco, like 1996 through probably 2006, 2007. Like everything was open, the country was changing, the press was very free, and it really created this dynamic that allowed the country to be free and democratic for a moment. And I think also the global moment was very helpful. Because human rights became more and more important after the demise of the Soviet Union. And I think also this global jurisdiction, now like people like Belgium and other countries can sue and pursue people for violations of human rights. I think all of that had an impact on the way Hassan II handled the end of the years of lead. So by the time the new king came in 1999, he had leveled the terrain to make a smooth transition of the throne, but also created, I think, the railway for the next generation of reforms, particularly the ERC, the Equity and Reconciliation Commission, to take place and revisit the years of lead and their legacy.
Amazing. Okay, I want to ask one final question, which is just another list of recommendations. Yeah. Just because you're a professor of comparative literature, you mentioned a lot of academics who published academic books. Yeah. Do you have any books, literature that you think would be great reads for folks who are interested in a broader version of Morocco and North Africa?
So I think it depends on what people want to read. My go-to would be like Layla Al-Alami, for example, would be a wonderful read. Like all her works, she writes from the United States, but she engages with Morocco a lot. I would say in Morocco per se, Abdel Fattah Keyleto's work, all the stuff that he wrote about language and translation. Would be really interesting to read, and kind of like brings in a different perspective to the study of literature. Abdeslam bin Abdel Ali, he also did a lot of work on translation, and one of his books is coming out next year in English, so that would be an exciting work to read and kind of like engage with Morocco. In Arabic, I would say like Muhammad Tazi would be somebody to read. He has a lot of novels, including the one I write about, An Elemency, The Forgotten. Really fascinating storytelling. There are also works in Darija that people can read. I can't remember exactly right now like some of the titles, but we're working. We established a series with Georgetown to translate Amazigh literature into English. Some of these works will be coming out soon, like in the next few years. One of them would be like the Crow's Bread, Azargi's novel. Another one is Tawargit Dimik. Tawargit Dimik was A Dream and a Little More. That's like another book in Tamazigh, but there is a lot of like poetry and all of that. So, but a lot of it is not translated, so I would not get into details about it. Yeah.
Brahim, thank you so much. People can find your book everywhere books are found, and we will put up an article up on Deftar, our online magazine, with some of these titles. So look out for that. Brahim, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Maggie.